starry saber lay at the heart of Chernarus, a busy central city with cobbled streets around the bell tower square, where buses sighed in and out of the station. Market sellers packed their stalls under striped awnings, and the smell of diesel mixed with the warm scent of roasted nuts from a cart beneath the arcade. Stan was 40, a normal man with the solid shoulders of someone who had hauled crates and boxes for years, built for work rather than fighting. And he managed the small electronics store on the square that sold everything from phone chargers to second-hand radios. Across the square stood the little pet care shop with the green painted door and brass bell that jingled whenever its owner came in, carrying sacks of feed. That was Plemena's place. She was 26 and beautiful in a way that needed no effort at all. Dark hair caught the lamplight like wet silk, eyes the soft green of sea glass after rain, a calm, graceful presence that made stray animals trust her and made people glance twice, even when she wore the shop apron. That October evening, the flat they shared above the shop smelled of frying onions and clean laundry. The window stood open to the wood smoke drifting in from the hills and to the distant hum of buses braking in the square. Plemena moved easily about the little kitchen, stirring a pan with one hand while folding clothes with the other, a small overnight bag already half packed on the chair.
Papa's knee is bad again,
she said, meaning Nikolai, her father, a retired army sergeant whose back was still straight as a rifle barrel.
Mama says the frost will ruin the garden if we don't lift the potatoes tomorrow.
Stan, bent over the shop's accounts book with a pencil stub, smiled at her without looking up. You'll be back before the weekend. I'll keep the shop standing, she answered with a quiet smile that had undone him years before. They ate a plain supper, while the television muttered in the corner about a strange flu outbreak in the south. He muted it, and for a moment there was only the scrape of cutlery on plates and the muffled city noises below. Later he stayed up working on the books at the table while she repacked the bag twice the way she always did, and then kissed the top of his head before going to bed. He fell asleep on the couch to a late-night cooking show where the host burned his onions and laughed it off. The blanket she had left for him, smelling faintly of the rosemary she mixed into her shampoo. Somewhere after 2 in the morning, a siren rose thin and far off from the highway, not the factory whistle that sometimes blew in fog. He woke halfway, decided it was nothing, and drifted back down. An hour later, a dog began barking in that ragged, panicked way that means the world has tipped the wrong way, and it would not stop. Stan sat up. The television screen was a dead gray slab, the cable box light gone. The air that came in through the balcony door carried beneath the wood smoke a sour thread, half chemical, half burnt plastic. He went to the window and saw down in the square a man in an undershirt staggering against the side of a parked police car, hammering at the window with jerky blows as if his joints no longer belonged to him. Stan tried Plemena's number. The call would not connect. A recorded voice said the network was congested. A single text waited at the top of the screen. Road blocked. I'm okay. Don't worry. He stared at it until the screen went dark and showed his own pale reflection. From the shop below came the brittle crash of a glass shelf breaking, then the soft drag of something heavy across the linoleum. He picked up the old baseball bat that had always leaned by the door and crept halfway down the narrow stairwell, holding his breath because even breath felt too loud. The storeroom door stood open a hand's width. Through the gap, he saw something crouched by the fallen rack of headphones, its shoulders moving in a wet, jerking rhythm. Kurilenko? He whispered, the name of the timber yard watchman, because the mouth still wanted sense even when the eyes could not find any. The figure turned its head toward him with a strange, slow grace, and then the rest of the body snapped round too fast for a human neck. Stan slammed the door, jammed the bat through the handle, stumbled back up the stairs, and shoved the dresser across his own door. He sat on the floor with his knees up and listened to the thudding on the storeroom door below and to distant sirens that came and went like nightmares sliding under the city's skin. Dawn came over Starry Saber, colorless and cold. The square below looked like a stage abandoned in the night. A child's school bag lying open in the gutter, a smashed phone on the kiosk steps, a bicycle on its side by the bus stop. Stan stood a long time behind the shop counter, staring at the neat rows of headphones and phone chargers as if the geometry of plastic and wire could tell him what to do. At last, he took a canvas rucksack and packed it the way a man going away for 2 days might pack. Bread, 3 bottles of water, 2 chocolate bars, a roll of bandage, a lighter, and the small seaside photo of Plamina, with the wind blowing her hair across her laughing mouth. He set the shop keys beside the till, stepped out into the empty square, and kept to the back streets that still smelled of wet coal smoke and cabbage soup spilled from pots the night before. Near the truck depot, he found a white Lada with both doors left open and one tire sagging to the rim. Inside, it smelled of damp cloth and stale oil. When he reached under the driver's seat, his fingers touched cold metal. An old Colt 1911 pistol, the bluing worn to silver, in a cracked leather holster with 5 rounds in the magazine and one already chambered. That night, he wedged broken boards against the car doors, lay in the back seat beneath a greasy blanket, and listened to the rain drum on the thin roof. Once something shuffled in the gravel outside, paused, then went away. He drifted in and out of shallow sleep, and each time the smell of wet cloth and gun oil brought Plamina's face into his thoughts. In that half-dreaming gray, he made himself a promise that felt like a prayer. I will find you. At first, the road east out of Starry Saber was empty, except for wind-pushing scraps of newspaper over the tarmac. Stan kept to the edge of the highway, slipping between stands of birch and pine whenever he heard distant footsteps that never came close enough to show themselves. Somewhere past the old sawmill, a delivery truck lay nose down in a ditch with its rear doors torn open. He avoided it and the black smears around the wheels. Toward noon, as the clouds thickened, he heard voices ahead, male, low, rough, and crouched behind the ruins of a billboard to watch. 2 men in ragged hunting jackets were blocking a narrow farm track. At first, he thought they were arguing over the carcass of a deer. Then he saw a slight figure, a young woman, no more than 20, standing stiffly with a small rucksack clutched to her chest. One man shoved her shoulder while the other gestured at the pack. Stan kept still, wanting no part of strangers' quarrels. But when the taller man tore the bag from her hands and she stumbled and fell into the mud, something in him tightened. He raised the old Colt in both hands, stepped out from cover, and shouted for them to leave her alone. Both turned, surprised at the voice. The one with the rucksack swung it behind him and started toward Stan with a sneer, the other shouldering a battered hunting rifle as if to warn him off. Stan's own hands were shaking. He tried again to tell them to back away. The taller one kept coming. The younger one brought the rifle half up, and in that uncertain heartbeat, the shot went off by itself. The sound cracked across the wet fields and startled a flock of crows into the air. The man with the rifle spun and fell as though his legs had been pulled from under him. The tall one dropped the rucksack, swore, and bolted into the trees, never once looking back. Stan stood for a long moment staring at the body in the dirt, the pistol still raised, the woman sitting frozen where she'd fallen. The echo died, and the silence after it felt heavier. He lowered the Colt at last and went to her. She scrambled to her feet, clutching the muddy rucksack, eyes wide and unblinking.
Go,
she whispered hoarsely, and when he tried to ask if she was hurt, she shook her head and kept saying it.
Go. Go!
Until she backed away into the birches and was gone, the wet grass closing behind her. He turned back to the fallen man because leaving him there untouched felt wrong, yet touching him felt worse. Under the dead man's shoulder, he saw the wooden stock of a long gun, the sling strap dark with rain. He knelt, hands reluctant, and drew out a Winchester M70 hunting rifle with a 3 to 9 times scope clouded at the edges and a leather cartridge pouch still half full of brass-cased .308 rounds. It was the first time he had taken anything from the dead. He slung it across his back, the weight settling against his spine as if it belonged there, and moved on without looking again at the body in the weeds. The sky lowered as he walked. By the time he reached the outskirts of Svetloyarsk, the rain had turned to sleet. The seaside town smelled of rotting fish and smoke from fires that had burned out in the night. He made his way to Plamina's parents' house. The kitchen table held a cold teacup and a note scrawled in pencil deep enough to dent the wood.
Left with soldiers. Father called, heading north.
Underneath were 2 lines of map grid numbers written as though the writer hadn't been sure they were allowed to know them. He folded the note and slid it into his pocket, searched the rest of the house for more, found nothing but the signs of hurried departure. In the clinic storeroom, he scavenged bottles of water and a box of crackers stamped with an expiry date already passed. A dust-ringed radio on the counter gave him static until, just for a heartbeat, a flat official voice slid past the noise.
Plamena, evac convoy to Tisy. Repeat, to Tisy.
And was gone as though the air itself had swallowed it. He spoke her name into the microphone again and again until his own voice sounded borrowed, but the static stayed. North of the city, he left the road to avoid groups of infected that wandered like sleepwalkers across intersections. Hunger began to gnaw, and when his last bottle ran dry, he knelt by a narrow forest stream, cupped the water in his hands, and drank until his thirst dulled. The next day, fever hit like a hammer. Cramps doubled him over, his gut clenched, and water ran out of him until he had nothing left to give. He crawled into an abandoned farmhouse off the track, barricaded the door with a fallen beam, and lay 2 days on the bare boards, in a sweat-stinking haze, shivering and burning by turns. The crackers went soggy in his mouth. He forced them down to keep his hands from trembling. Once in the night, he thought he heard Plamena calling his name through the wall. But it was only wind under the eaves. On the 3rd morning, the fever broke, leaving him hollow and weak but alive. By the time he reached Novodmitrovsk, he was walking like an old man. The concrete apartment block stood gray and blind-eyed against the sleet, metal signs banging in the wind. The supermarket on the square had been stripped to the floor tiles. He slept one night in the shoe aisle with his back against the rack of socks, telling himself the joke kept him sane. In Novaya Petrovka, he bartered the last of his lighter fluid for a dented tin of beans and watched 2 men fight to the death over the rumor of a map. Nobody even stopped eating to stare. The world had shrunk too fast for morals to keep up. When at last the land opened into the flat sprawl of the northwest airfield, he climbed a low ridge above the perimeter fence and lay belly down behind a tangle of roots, the Winchester stock snug in his shoulder. Through the scope, he swept the long tarmac strips scarred by old tire marks, counted clusters of infected staggering in slow circles around a rusted fuel truck, saw another loose knot of them drift like weeds in the lee of a hangar, then slid the sight line over to the distant control tower and the squat block of the command center beyond it, with its doors blown wide and a toppled antenna beside it. He stayed there for the better part of an hour, learning the shambler's wandering loops and the direction of the wind, feeling the strange new calm of a man who could see without being seen. At dusk, he worked his way down, using the gaps between derelict vehicles, and slipped through a side entrance of the command block. Inside, the corridors smelled of mouse droppings, old fuel, and the flat iron scent of blood that had dried long ago. Papers lay strewn across the floors like pale leaves. In a back office with a wall map of Chernarus, gone yellow at the edges, he found a folder swollen with damp. Inside were transfer orders stamped and countersigned in 2 different inks. Among the blurred typewritten names, one was still clear enough to read: Plamina, Kivivac, Auth, Esgetten, Reet, Root, Novo, NWF, TISY. A note scrawled in another hand below read, "Insufficient escort, under protest." He folded the orders carefully and slipped them into his jacket, then left the airfield the way he had come, skirting the shamblers that still wandered their aimless patrol. Snow began to fall in earnest as he moved north into the hills. By the time he reached the outer wire of Tisy, the ground was white and the sky pressed low and leaden. The old military base crouched beneath it like an animal too tired to rise. Barracks with doors hanging open, motor pool bays filled with drifts of snow and the stink of oil and rusting iron. In a records office whose door had been kicked off its hinges, he found a field journal in a dented metal drawer. The penciled entry cut deep into the paper as though the hand that wrote it had been shaking. Convoy Bravo received list from Sergeant Nikolai. Retired, civilians tagged for evac, names confirmed. Plamena, priority due to medical. Transfer authorization L12. Destination, Livonia staging. Entry made under protest. Insufficient escort. Stan read it twice more, then sat down on the edge of the cold desk and felt the weight of the past days settling on him. The sickness, the miles of frozen road, the faces of the men he had killed and the ones he had left behind. Somewhere west of here lay Livonia, another country behind a border of forests and rivers, and God knew what in between. His strength felt used up before the journey had even begun. He climbed to an upper room of the deserted barracks as dusk bled into night. The snow kept falling in slanting lines across the cracked window. He drew the old Colt 1911, thumbed back the hammer, and pressed the barrel gently to his temple, shutting his eyes. In the darkness behind his eyelids, he saw Plamena as she had been that last evening in the kitchen. Young, beautiful, alive, her hair falling loose as she laughed at something he had said. "I'm sorry, love," he whispered, meaning to end it before the cold or the infected or his own luck could. A heavy, hollow thump came from outside the building, faint but distinct enough to freeze his finger on the trigger. He opened his eyes, lowered the gun, and moved to the broken window. Across the yard, in the bluish half-light of the snow, he saw the angular silhouette of a small, military little bird helicopter, half buried in drifted snow near the motor pool fence, its tail boom bent against a concrete barrier, side doors hanging open. One of the safety harness belts inside had snared what was left of a soldier, now an infected thing that twisted and jerked uselessly against the strap like a fly caught in a web. The helicopter's cargo pods and fuel bladders were still bolted to the skids, gear cases strapped down under a frosting of ice. The craft looking battered, but not beyond hope. Stan stared at it through the swirling snow, the pistol still loose in his hand, breath fogging the glass. The despair that had been about to pull him under shifted, leaving a thin, hard edge of something else in its place. A possibility. The gun lowered to his side. He kept watching the helicopter and the thrashing figure trapped in the harness, thinking of the word Livonia like a dark line drawn west across the snow map of his mind. He was about to turn from the window when a flicker of movement on the tree line beyond the wire caught his eye. 4 figures in dark winter coats picking their way slowly along the fence line. One carried a rifle slung across his chest, another raised an arm to point straight toward the base. Stan's pulse kicked hard. His hand slid back to the Colt's grip. He glanced from the 4 strangers to the little bird, the only thing that might get him across the border to Livonia, and to the thrashing infected soldier tangled in the cockpit harness. Stan's jaw clenched. If the strangers reached the gate first, there'd be no chance to try the chopper. He whispered to himself, as if saying it aloud could make it true. Kill that thing. Get that bird in the air. Fast.